He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to trust, but what happened next would crack open walls he'd spent 5 years building around his heart. Boone Carter stood by his ranch fence, hammer in hand, sweat cutting trails through the dust on his weathered face. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the endless stretch of wooden posts and wire that marked his territory. Each plank had been measured, cut and nailed with the precision of a man who trusted only his own hands. The fence stood straight and strong, like everything else on his property, built to keep things in their proper place. He wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve, surveying the work. Not a single board out of alignment. Not one loose nail. The fence would outlast the next 3 winters and probably the ones after that. It had to. Everything he owned depended on keeping what was his protected from what lay beyond. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him tense. His shoulders squared and his grip tightened on the hammer. Visitors meant complications. Complications meant people wanting something he wasn't willing to give. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. A woman rode up slowly on a chestnut mare, her posture confident but not threatening. Mercy Whitmore. He recognized her from town, the widow who'd moved in 3 miles north after her husband passed. She sat her horse well, and her eyes held the kind of steady gaze that suggested she wasn't easily rattled. "Afternoon, Mr. Carter," she said, touching the brim of her worn hat. Her voice carried the slight rasp of someone accustomed to calling across wide spaces. Boone nodded curtly, saying nothing. Words were tools that could be used against you. He'd learned that too. Mercy's gaze traveled along the fence line, taking in the clean lines and solid construction. "That's fine work you've done here. Your fence looks strong, built to last." Something shifted in Boone's chest, a crack in ice he'd thought permanent. No one had bothered to notice his work in years. Most folks saw only what they wanted from him, never what he'd accomplished on his own. But this woman saw the fence, really saw it. He found himself staring at her, searching for the angle, the manipulation hidden behind the compliment. There had to be one. There always was. But her expression remained steady, matter of fact, as if she'd simply stated an obvious truth about the weather. "Appreciate you saying so," he heard himself respond, the words rusty from disuse. She nodded once, then gathered her reins. "Good day to you, Mr. Carter." As she rode away, Boone remained by the fence, hammer forgotten in his hand. The compliment echoed in his mind like a stone dropped in still water, creating ripples he couldn't quite understand. For the first time in 5 years, someone had seen his work and found it worthy. But what he didn't know was that this simple moment would set in motion events that would force him to choose between the safety of his isolation and the terrifying possibility of trust. That night, Boone couldn't shake the woman's words. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams he'd cut and fitted himself, but all he could hear was her voice saying his fence looked strong. The compliment shouldn't matter. It was just words from a stranger who didn't know the first thing about him or what he'd been through. But it had been so long since someone noticed anything he'd built without wanting something in return that the memory kept circling back like a persistent fly. He rose before dawn, as always, and went through his morning routine. Feed the horses, check the water troughs, inspect the livestock for signs of injury or illness. The work kept his hands busy, but it couldn't quiet his mind. When he reached the fence line where Mercy had stopped yesterday, he found himself running his palm along the smooth wood. The boards were straight and true, fitted tight against each other. Good work, honest work. Maybe she'd been right to notice, and the thought made him angry with himself. He'd sworn off caring what women thought after Dorothy, after she'd taken everything that mattered and disappeared one morning with a traveling salesman, leaving nothing but empty drawers and a note that cut deeper than any blade. "Built to last," she'd said. If only she knew how many things he'd built that hadn't lasted at all. The sound of approaching riders broke his brooding. 3 men on horseback emerged from the tree line, and Boone recognized them immediately. Marcus Webb and his sons, Clay and Wade. Trouble on horseback, all 3 of them. Webb owned the largest spread in the county and wasn't shy about reminding folks of it. He'd been trying to buy Boone's land for 2 years, ever since cattle prices started climbing. His offers had grown more insistent with each rejection. "Morning, Carter," Webb called out, reining in his horse just outside the fence line. His sons flanked him, hands resting casually on their gun belts. Boone nodded but didn't speak. The hammer from yesterday still hung from his belt, and his hand drifted toward it. "Been thinking about our last conversation," Webb continued, his voice carrying false friendliness. "That offer I made? I'm prepared to increase it by 20%. Still not interested?" Webb's smile tightened. "Man's gotta be practical, Carter. Running a spread this size alone, it's not natural, not smart either. A man needs people he can count on." The irony wasn't lost on Boone. Trust was exactly what these men were asking for, and trust was exactly what he couldn't give. Not anymore. "I manage fine. For now," Clay Webb spoke up, his tone carrying an edge his father's lacked. "But what happens when that fence of yours needs fixing and you're laid up? Who's gonna help then?" Boone's jaw tightened. They'd noticed his fence too, but not the craftsmanship, only the vulnerability. But what they didn't know was that someone else had been watching his property lately. Someone who might have very different reasons for paying attention to a man who lived alone. 2 days later, Boone heard gunshots echoing across the valley. 3 sharp cracks, then silence. His blood chilled. Those shots came from the direction of the Whitmore place. He saddled his horse faster than he'd moved in months, his hands working automatically while his mind raced. Could be anything. Could be nothing. But out here, gunshots usually meant trouble, and trouble for a woman living alone meant the worst kind of danger. The ride to Mercy's ranch felt endless. When he crested the hill overlooking her property, he saw her standing in her corral, rifle in hand, facing down a massive brown bear that had cornered 2 of her calves against the fence. The bear was wounded. Blood matted the fur on its shoulder, but far from finished. It swayed on its hind legs, massive claws gleaming in the afternoon sun. One swipe could tear a man apart, let alone a woman. Boone drew his own rifle and spurred his horse down the slope. The thunder of hoofbeats made the bear turn, confusion flickering in its dark eyes. That moment of distraction was all Mercy needed. Her rifle cracked again, and the bear dropped heavily to the earth. Silence settled over the corral like dust after a storm. "You hit?" Boone called out, keeping his rifle ready. "No," Mercy replied, but her voice shook slightly. "Came down from the mountains looking for food. Found my calves instead." Boone dismounted and approached the dead animal cautiously. The bear was old, probably driven from its territory by younger males. Desperate creatures did desperate things. He understood that better than most. "Good shooting," he said, meaning it. Mercy lowered her rifle, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked shaken. "Never shot anything that big before. Scared me more than I cared to admit." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Dorothy would have turned the incident into drama, making herself the center of attention, but Mercy simply stated the truth without embellishment. "Bear that size could have taken the whole herd," Boone observed, examining the carcass. "You saved more than just those calves." "Maybe." She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "But I can't drag this thing away from the corral by myself. The smell will draw scavengers." Boone found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "I'll help." The words surprised him, as much as they seemed to surprise her. When was the last time he'd offered help without being asked? When was the last time he'd wanted to? They worked in comfortable silence, using his horse and rope to drag the bear's carcass to the far edge of her property. Mercy proved herself capable and strong, never asking him to do what she could manage herself. As they finished, she turned to him with that same steady gaze that had unsettled him days before. "Thank you, Boone. I won't forget this." Something warm moved through his chest at the sound of his name on her lips. But as he rode home, a cold thought crept in. The last time he'd helped a woman, she'd used his kindness against him. What if this was just another trap? The next evening, smoke rose from the direction of Mercy's ranch. Boone saw it from his porch where he sat cleaning his rifle, the same weapon that had been ready but unused during the bear incident. The thin black column twisted against the orange sky, too thick for a cooking fire, too controlled for wildfire. His gut clenched. Something was wrong. He rode hard toward the Whitmore place, arriving to find her barn smoldering. The structure still stood, but one corner was charred black, and hay bales lay scattered across the yard. Mercy stood with a bucket in her hands, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. "What happened?" Boone demanded, dismounting quickly. Fire started around sunset. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly on the bucket handle. "Got it out before it spread, but barely." Boone examined the burned corner of the barn. The charring pattern was wrong for accidental fire. Too concentrated, too deliberate. Someone had set this. "You see anyone around before it started?" Mercy shook her head, then stopped. "Wait. Earlier today, 3 riders came by. Asked if I'd seen you. Said they had business to discuss." Ice formed in Boone's stomach. The Webbs. They'd escalated from pressure to threats, and now they were using Mercy to get to him. What did you tell them? The truth, that I hadn't seen you since yesterday. She set down the bucket and faced him directly. Boone, what kind of business do they have with you? He could lie, could tell her it was nothing and ride away, keeping her safely out of whatever war Marcus Webb wanted to start. But the soot on her face and the fear she was trying to hide made the words stick in his throat. They want my land. Been pushing hard since cattle prices went up. Hard enough to burn buildings? Webb's got his own way of convincing folks. Boone kicked at a piece of charred wood. And I've been saying no for too long. Mercy studied him with those steady eyes. This is my fault. If I hadn't stopped to talk to you that first day. If I hadn't come to help with the bear. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. This is on Webb, not you. But even as he said it, Boone felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Everyone who got close to him ended up hurt. Dorothy had left him, but at least she'd escaped before real harm came. Mercy might not be so lucky. You should stay somewhere else tonight, he said. Town, maybe. Until this settles. This is my ranch, and you'll be dead defending it if Webb decides burning buildings isn't enough. Then what do you suggest? The question hung between them like a bridge he was afraid to cross. Every instinct told him to ride away, to handle Webb alone the way he handled everything. But looking at Mercy's determined face and remembering the way she'd stood her ground against the bear, he realized she wouldn't run, even if he asked. You could... He stopped, the words choking him. I could what? Come to my place. Tonight, until we figure this out. The offer shocked him more than it seemed to shock her. For 5 years, no one had crossed the threshold of his house. No one had shared his space or seen the careful isolation he'd built. But what shocked him even more was that he meant it. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 1 p.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. Mercy stood in the doorway of Boone's house, hesitating for the first time since he'd known her. The interior was sparse but clean. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books. Everything in its place. Nothing unnecessary. Coffee? Boone asked, moving toward the kitchen with the stiff movements of a man unaccustomed to guests. Please. She settled into one of the chairs, and the domesticity of the moment struck him like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd made coffee for someone else? When was the last time another person's voice had filled these walls? You read a lot, Mercy observed, examining the books on his shelves. Passes the time. He poured 2 cups, his hand steadier than his voice. Gets quiet out here. I imagine it does. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with things neither wanted to name. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them both why she was here. Boone, Mercy said quietly. Why did Webb really target my place? There has to be more to it than just wanting your land. He set down his coffee cup harder than necessary. Because he knows I'll come running when you're in trouble. The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. Mercy's eyes widened slightly, and Boone realized he'd revealed more than he intended. You barely know me, she said. I know enough. Do you? She leaned forward, studying his face. Or do you just see what you want to see? The question hit too close to home. Wasn't that exactly what he'd done with Dorothy? Seen kindness where there had been calculation? Love where there had been manipulation? What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe Webb targeted me because someone told him I matter to you. Mercy's voice remained steady, but something had shifted in her expression. Maybe someone's been watching us both. Boone's blood chilled. What are you saying? I'm saying I found this near my barn before the fire started. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver locket, tarnished with age. Recognize it? The world tilted sideways. Boone's vision blurred as he stared at the familiar piece of jewelry. Dorothy's locket. The one she'd worn every day until she left. The one she'd claimed belonged to her grandmother. Where did you get that? I told you. Found it by the barn. Mercy's voice had grown cautious, as if she sensed the change in him. Boone, what's wrong? But he was already backing toward the door, his chest tight with familiar panic. The locket meant Dorothy was back, or had never really left. How long had she been watching? How long had this all been planned? You need to leave, he said, his voice rough. What? Get out. Now. Mercy stood slowly, confusion and hurt warring in her expression. "Boone, I don't understand. The locket belonged to my wife." The words tasted like poison. "My ex-wife. Which means either she's back or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the suspicion that was eating him alive. "Or what?" Mercy whispered. "Or you've been working with her all along." The accusation shattered the quiet peace of his home like glass. Mercy recoiled as if he'd struck her, and Boone hated himself for the words even as he believed them. Because the alternative, that Dorothy had returned to finish destroying what little peace he'd found, was too terrible to accept. Mercy left without another word, taking the locket with her. Boone watched from his window as she rode away into the darkness, her figure swallowed by shadows that seemed to mock his paranoia. For the next 2 days, he barely slept. Every sound outside sent him reaching for his rifle. Every movement in his peripheral vision made him spin around, expecting to see Dorothy's familiar silhouette. The isolation that had once felt like protection now felt like a trap. On the third morning, he found his water troughs poisoned. The horses had been smart enough not to drink much, but his prize bull lay dead in the pasture, foam dried around its mouth. Someone had gotten onto his property during the night and contaminated his water supply with something deadly. Boone knelt beside the bull, rage and helplessness warring in his chest. This wasn't Webb's style. Too subtle, too calculated. This was personal. Hoofbeats approached and he spun around to see Sheriff Morton riding up with Mercy close behind. The sight of her sent conflicting emotions through him. Relief that she was safe, anger that she'd brought the law into it, and underneath it all, a guilt he refused to acknowledge. "Heard you had some trouble," Morton said, dismounting and examining the dead animal. "Poisoned water," Boone replied curtly. "Happened sometime last night." "Any idea who might have done this?" Boone's eyes flicked to Mercy, who sat her horse with rigid posture. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read, and the uncertainty ate at him. "Could be anyone," he said finally. Morton walked to the water trough and sniffed. "Definitely poison. Probably something from the old mining claims up north. Question is, who'd know where to get it and how to use it?" "Someone with local knowledge," Mercy said quietly. "Someone who's been around these parts long enough to know the land." She was looking directly at Boone when she said it, and the implication hit him like a physical blow. She thought he'd done this himself, killed his own livestock to maintain his paranoid isolation. "You think I—" he started, then stopped. The hurt in her eyes was real, but so was the suspicion. Just like Dorothy had looked at him near the end, when every word became a weapon and every gesture carried hidden meaning. "I don't know what to think anymore," Mercy said. 3 days ago you offered me shelter. Yesterday you accused me of conspiring against you. Now your animals are dead, and you're looking at everyone like they're enemies." Sheriff Morton glanced between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "Maybe we should all calm down and focus on facts." But before anyone could respond, gunshots erupted from the direction of Mercy's ranch. Multiple rifles, firing rapidly. The sound carried across the valley like thunder, and all 3 of them tensed. "That's my place," Mercy said, her face going pale. She spurred her horse toward home, and after a moment's hesitation, Boone and Morton followed. But as they rode, Boone couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what someone wanted. All of them away from his ranch, rushing toward an obvious trap. The question was whether Mercy was bait or predator, and by the time he figured it out, it might be too late to save either of them. They arrived at Mercy's ranch to find it eerily quiet. No more gunshots, no signs of struggle, just an unsettling stillness that made Boone's skin crawl. Sheriff Morton held up his hand, signaling them to stop. "Something's not right. Those shots stopped too sudden." Mercy's house sat undisturbed, but her barn door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Fresh hoofprints marked the dirt around the corral, at least 6 horses, maybe more. "They're gone," Mercy whispered, scanning the empty yard. "Or waiting," Boone said grimly. That's when he saw her. Dorothy stepped out from behind the barn, older now but unmistakably the woman who'd destroyed his life 5 years ago. She wore a traveling dress and a smile that had once fooled him completely. "Hello, Boone." The sight of her hit him like a physical blow, but it was the man who emerged beside her that made his blood freeze. Marcus Webb, rifle cradled casually in his arms. "Surprised to see me?" Dorothy continued, her voice carrying that familiar tone of false sweetness. "I've been back for months, watching you play the hermit. Quite pathetic, really." "Dorothy!" The name came out like a curse. When Marcus told me he needed your land, I offered to help, for old time's sake. She gestured toward Mercy with theatrical contempt. Though I admit I didn't expect you to find a replacement so quickly. Boone felt Mercy stiffen beside him, understanding dawning in her eyes. This had all been orchestrated. The compliment about his fence, the bear attack, even the fire, all designed to draw them together so Dorothy could tear them apart. You planned this, Mercy said, her voice tight with anger. The locket. You wanted him to suspect me. Clever girl. Dorothy's smile turned cruel, though not clever enough to realize that complimenting a broken man's fence would lead to this. Sheriff Morton raised his rifle, but Webb was faster. The sound of his shot echoed across the valley, and Morton crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Now then, Webb said conversationally, let's discuss terms. Your land for their lives, Carter. Simple transaction. Boone's mind raced. 3 of them against at least 6 armed men. Morton wounded. Mercy trapped in the middle of his nightmare. Every instinct screamed at him to fight alone, to handle this the way he'd handled everything for 5 years. But then Mercy spoke, her voice calm despite the fear in her eyes. Your fence was strong, Boone, built to last. But the best fences protect what matters, not keep out what might help. The words hit him like lightning. She was right. His emotional walls had protected nothing and cost him everything. If he wanted to save her, save them both, he had to do something he'd sworn never to do again. He had to trust. Morton, he called quietly, can you cover the barn door? The wounded sheriff nodded grimly, raising his rifle with his good arm. Mercy, Boone continued, his eyes never leaving Dorothy's face. When I move, you run for the house. There's a rifle above the fireplace. What about you? I'm going to settle an old debt. And for the first time in 5 years, Boone Carter chose to trust someone else with his life. Boone moved faster than he had in years, trusting Mercy to reach safety while he charged directly at Webb. The older man's rifle swung toward him, but Morton's shot from the ground caught Webb in the leg, sending him stumbling. Dorothy screamed as Boone tackled Webb, both men hitting the ground hard. The rifle flew from Webb's hands, landing several feet away. Behind them, more gunshots erupted as Webb's men emerged from hiding, but Mercy's voice called out from the house. I've got the barn covered. Her rifle cracked twice, and Boone heard men shouting orders. Their advantage suddenly turned to chaos. She was keeping her word, protecting his back while he fought. Webb was younger and heavier, but Boone fought with 5 years of suppressed rage. Every punch landed with the force of betrayal, abandonment, and loneliness. When Webb tried to reach for a hidden pistol, Boone's fist connected with his jaw, and the man went limp. Enough! Dorothy's voice cut through the violence. Boone turned to find her holding a small derringer pointed at Mercy, who stood framed in the doorway of the house. Even at this distance, the little gun could do deadly damage. Always the dramatic one, Boone said, rising slowly from Webb's unconscious form. Drop your weapon or I'll put a hole in your precious widow. Like you put a hole in my life? Dorothy's laugh held no warmth. You did that yourself, Boone. All I did was take what I could carry. You're the one who chose to become a ghost. She was right, and the truth of it settled over him like dust after a storm. Dorothy had betrayed him, but he'd chosen isolation. She'd taken his trust, but he'd refused to rebuild it. You're right, he said quietly. I did become a ghost, but ghosts can't feel anything, can't be hurt. Exactly. So why risk it all for her? Boone looked at Mercy, standing straight and unafraid despite the gun pointed at her heart. She'd seen his worst paranoia, endured his accusations, and still trusted him enough to fight beside him. Because feeling something real is worth the risk of losing it. Dorothy's face contorted with rage. You always were a fool. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but Sheriff Morton's voice stopped her cold. Dorothy Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. She spun around to find the wounded sheriff standing behind her, his rifle trained on her chest. In her focus on Boone and Mercy, she'd forgotten about the third player in their deadly game. The derringer clattered to the ground as Morton took her into custody. 3 weeks later, Boone stood by his fence again, but this time he wasn't alone. Mercy worked beside him, replacing the boards that had been damaged during the confrontation. Her movements were efficient and sure, and when she caught him watching her, she smiled. Still think it looks strong? She asked, echoing her first words to him. Getting stronger every day, he replied, meaning more than just the fence. Dorothy and Webb were in jail awaiting trial. The ranch was safe. But more importantly, the walls around Boone's heart had finally come down, replaced by something better. Trust earned through shared danger and mutual respect. He'd learned that the strongest fences weren't built to keep people out, but to protect what mattered most. And what mattered most was standing right beside him, building something that would truly last. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.